I want to take a look at just a couple of things here and get your reaction here. Do you have the book in front of you by chance?
Yeah.
Okay, on my page 56, which is 4th edition, page 56, which is roughly line 50, just a little bit before that, like 48. Sinuhe, as you said, has been traveling with a prince, and he hears they get word from back home that the king, the pharaoh, has died. It's a little uncertain. There are very few details provided. All we have to go on is that the pharaoh has died, and Sinuhe seems anxious about this. Now, in any moment of history when a leader dies in office, and when you're a king or a pharaoh, that's pretty much how you go, there is a moment of instability, just political reality. Generally speaking, kingdoms will set up the rule of succession, where most often is the firstborn son steps into the role and has a continuous line throughout that. But of course, the firstborn son you don't have to look far in history or contemporary life to see that firstborn sons, or any of the sons, tend to be morons, and that creates a little instability, because maybe there's a cousin who has a following and is much better in every single way, or maybe a younger brother, or hey, maybe a sister. Moments of instability where it's not sure where the power will fall. And that's where Sinuhe finds himself. He's not sure what's going to happen, and he kind of panics. And exactly why he leaves is a little bit uncertain, and the story plays with that throughout. But I want to look at this one paragraph. He freaks out. He runs away. I traveled southwards. I did not plan to reach this residence expecting strife would happen. He is anticipating, by his reading of the events, he is anticipating things are, dangerous. He's trying to figure out what it all means. Expecting strife would happen. I did not think to live after him. I went across Lake Madi to the region of the Sycamore. I came to the Isle of Sneferu. I will not pronounce anything correctly from now until the end of the semester, so let's just posit that. Sneferu, I passed a day on the edge of a field. He's just running in pure terror. Running away.
Can I add something?
What?
I found interesting that the Lake Madi, the Madi is the goddess of order. So saying that he crossed the Lake of Madi, meaning that he crossed, then it's now rather disorder. Right?
Yeah, there is a whole lot of symbolism going on here. He is running away from order. He is running away from everything that is structured, everything that he knows. He is running into the wilderness. I passed a day on the edge of a field. When it was daylight again, I made an early start. I met a man standing in my way. He saluted me, though I was afraid of him. That's an interesting detail. Why would he be afraid of this person? You might think they're, this guy might be a soldier for the pharaoh, sent to hunt him down. He is essentially AWOL at this point, absent without leave. Anybody walking around out there that he stumbles across could be a threat, could be a spy, an assassin, could be anything sent to drag him home, punish him, kill him, or could just be your average, nobody out there. He's surrounded by, evidently he's pretty far out into the wilderness at this point. There is nothing around. He's been running for days from the site of civilization. And, you come across a stranger, anything could happen. You don't know who this guy is. It's scary.
But my question is, why would the person saluted him? Like, do we know him? Like, the person who saluted him?
No. At this point in the story, you have no idea who anybody is. You barely know who Sinuhe is at this point. You just know that he's a guy who worked in the royal court, was of some authority there, and he freaked out and ran away. And that's everything you know. Question.
Maybe
Come.
the way he was dressed, because he was running away, maybe the way he dressed, at least outside civilization, was not familiar with that, and thought it was someone big and royal and stuff like that, so they saluted out of respect or something like that.
Yeah.
I would think that was going to go.
Everybody who's meeting out there with no context of how to understand it is looking for any way to read some other person, to have an understanding of, well, who could it be? How do I make sense of this? And before you even open your mouth, there are conclusions that you can draw. Some of that might have to do with dress. In the ancient world, different parts of the world, different tribes had different ways of dressing. Different materials were available to them, so you start to get an idea of, oh, okay, they're making their clothes out of this material. Chances are they're coming from that part of the world over there where they tend to make their clothes to look like this, or to be of this material or something like that. Or you can see jewelry. Some of the stuff we were looking at last week with the jewelry that we saw in the statues, we saw different codes for identifying. And he is trying to struggle out how to read this identity. Is this person a threat? Significantly, however, and it's been suggested, he saluted me, though I was afraid of him. That's an interesting little inversion of there. Art, you got something to say?
Yes. Well, I think it's a very good example of symbolism as well. The fact that he just met some guy is not very important, because he spent a very short time of describing their meeting. If you just saw it, that's it. And then next he's saying, I'm rather cannot play. The meeting is not important. He's trying to show his feelings.
Yeah.
That he was afraid of literally anything, even some random guy with a straight.
He's afraid of anything, but in this case, he's afraid of something relatively specific, and that is, and I think we just said, foreigners. He's afraid of foreigners. Technically, he is a foreigner, and so maybe that's what threw him off a little bit, as he is running away into this other part of the world, which will judge him, the foreigner, the alien. He saluted me, though I was afraid of him. Now, again, you can't read too much into language and word choices and stuff like this, because the translation can be very fraught. We're going from not only, different languages, but different alphabets, different ways of writing, different orthographies, and pinning too much on the word saluted is kind of a trap. You can't really do that. But clearly here, there is a sense that he saluted me, could be friendly, could be hostile, but he made the first overture, though I was afraid of him. Now, that could be a sense of the first guy, the foreigner, reading that Sinuhe was clearly terrified and, he's reaching out. Or maybe this salute is somehow a little bit more threatening. You don't know. It's not explained. all you're given is the perspective of Sinuhe in this moment, and it's just his feelings. And it really doesn't matter who this guy was. He disappears immediately. It's just that sense of, this is a foreigner, and somehow that represents danger. Bear that in mind. I want to jump ahead. My page 57, towards the end of the paragraph or the stanza on the top, around line 75, he is still running. I traveled in the nighttime. When it was dawn, I had reached Petin. I alighted on an island of Kimmer. Thirst's attack overtook me, and I was scorched, my throat parched. I said, "This is the taste of death." Obviously getting quite desperate. But I lifted up my heart and gathered my limbs together as I heard the noise of cattle lowing, caught the sight of Syrians, and the leader of theirs, who had once been in Egypt, recognized me. So he is on, quite literally, at this point, a point of death. And he suddenly sees a familiar face. Wild coincidence, I know. This would not get past the book editors selling this story today. They go, come on. But no editors at that time. You can pretty much write anything. But whenever you come across wild coincidences, you got to think, well, okay, this is less about the literal and more about the symbolic, perhaps. Because if the literal seems a little slippery, a little unlikely, it's still happening for a reason. And maybe they're just leaning a little hard and trying to make it seem like it could literally happen when really it's only about the symbolic nature of it. He was totally desperate on the point of death, and he sees what? Hope. A chance at life, a chance at salvation. Be dragged so low that you have the opportunity to survive. Now that's pretty powerful. On a literal level, anybody who has ever been in a moment like that, when you feel, okay, this is it, to then seize on a moment that you can snatch at for life is very powerful. And stories of that have existed since time began, because it's universal. Even if your life has never been in any particular mortal danger, we have all experienced moments of some desperation. Maybe it's moral, maybe it's spiritual, but moments where we feel like we're at the end of our rope, and then something appears, and we have a chance to grab at it. That's powerful. That's beautiful in an abstract and real sense. What?
So the process is that he's running out with no food, no water, nothing. At this point, this is what it means.
Well, yeah, on a literal level, what he's doing is stupid. We can call it for what it is. This is not somebody who really thought ahead. He didn't go and hit up Amazon and stock up on survival gear before embarking on this. A canteen would be handy at this moment in his existence, but he didn't think of that. But turn that back around and say, well, that just ups the stakes for what he is doing. And how many of us have, from time to time, perhaps, done something irrational that we didn't really think through. So it can appeal to you on that level because, again, it's universal. Everybody has done stupid stuff without thinking it through. That's kind of what youth is about. Here is an example of somebody who did that, and we are following him. And because of the somewhat unbelievable quality to it, then we can start to extrapolate and say, well, okay, maybe this is just like a little parable. The story itself is silly, but it has symbolic meanings, you know? What does it mean when he says, this is the taste of death, but I lifted up my heart and gathered my limbs together, in that order?
Right.
What?
Right.
Prayed? Yeah, I think so. I lifted up my heart. I think there's a Christian hymn that goes on like that or something. But I think this is a moment of desperation. I lifted up my heart in prayer of some form and gathered my limbs together. And I want to focus for a second on the division of those two ideas and the ordering of those two ideas. Ordering, like vocabulary, ordering is in grammatical form is syntax, and we can't lean on that too much in a translation. But I think this is significant here. The prayer came first. The lifting up your heart, your spiritual aspect, comes first, and in essence, drags along your physical aspect. He was about to die. Physically, perhaps spiritually, maybe both. He was about to die, but he found hope. He seized on it, and suddenly, physically, he felt better. And then that is the moment where he sees somebody. So it's not just the seeing of someone that gives hope. It's the action of belief in this instance. The spiritual precedes the physical. Little clues like this, where you're just reading along, it's very easy to skip over stuff like this. And maybe I am making something out of nothing, I don't know. I probably am. But little things crop up like, well, you know, why did they phrase it like that? They could phrase it any number of different ways. There are, if you were to go home, this is a very simple story. You could rewrite this story on your own in very little time because the details are fairly sparse. The only thing that really takes up the pages is those little moments of how things are created, how things are done. And those are the things that you really have to pay attention to because the story itself is not that complicated. It's about how it is articulated, how it is communicated, that we can start to draw out some meanings. When they phrase something in a particular way and you stumble across, you know, would I say it that way? Would I take the time to write it that way? Would I preserve it in that precise phrasing? Why? Cui bono? Who benefits from phrasing it that way? On page 60, at the top, he has fallen in with the Syrians. They recognize him as somebody of some worth, some consequence. He is, he was in Egypt a fairly high-ranking bureaucrat, essentially. He worked in the royal court. You get the sense that, he knew the pharaoh in some capacity and perhaps was aligned with a particular political faction within the court, and maybe that's why he ran off. Again, this is all just speculation, but clearly he was somebody with some education and some training and some ability. He was an aristocrat within the royal court. That's what that meant. And now, through all of his wanderings and the circumstances he's found himself in, he is in the wilds of Syria, where in a tribal culture, his skills are still of great value. A local tribal chieftain takes a shining to him, marries him to, the most beautiful daughter he has, and sets him up in life. And suddenly he's a very rich man, and he's living the good life. And he has his own kids, and, life is good. At the top of page 60. I spent many years there, and my children became heroes, each man subjugating his tribe. Each man. Coming right after my children, so I'm going to assume his sons subjugating his own tribe. Now this really, his kids don't get a lot of attention in this story. Not a lot of focus on his family life, and in fact at the end he just up and leaves them all. So clearly they are not significant characters here. So why include that detail about them? What does it mean? What could it mean? Why would anyone bother to write that down, to carve it into a rock, to preserve it for centuries or thousands of years? Yes?
Maybe to show a point that the skills he brought into the tribe and everything kind of like paid off, and like the future generation is doing what he taught them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or to carry on his legacy or something like that.
Sure. The future generation is carrying on the legacy of the patriarch. That legacy is one of clearly some management skill, perhaps some expertise. As a royal courtier of the time, Sinuhe probably had a fairly good ability to count and to write, not necessarily writing poetry in his journal at night, but writing accounts of, well, this is how many sheep I had at the beginning of the day. And, well, 3 days later, I see the same list, but it's different. I lost sheep. What happened in there? Accounting. It's a glorious tradition. But subjugating his tribe, that's an interesting term. What does that mean, subjugating? Making them subjects, royal subjects, if it were. Essentially asserting themselves and their own leadership over other people, subjugating. But again, this isn't about the next generation necessarily. It's all about Sinuhe and his example. What does this say?
I think he wanted to express his family life as well and how he's building over there.
Yeah. He's building a life. He is setting down roots in this foreign land for an exile, which is what he is. He is, he's not just nobody. He's building a life for himself.
Maybe that what he creates is always like good. So if his kids are subjugating like their areas, then he's over them.
Yeah. He is subjugating his kids. His kids are subjugating the people after him. The kids could also be jackasses, let's be honest. I mean, you know, we don't have to look far to find an example of, the second generation of any successful person being really, absolutely worthless.
But he says that all his children became heroes, so he's like trying to show that he built a good life. Like he doesn't have any reason why to like want to ever leave it. They're just
Yeah. Why would he go anywhere? Life is pretty good over in Syria. He's pretty comfortable. He's a wealthy man. He's got, a prominent family connection. He has kids who are very successful. Living the dream. Come on. Sit back and relax. Yes, in the back.
I don't know if her mind interpretation felt somewhat selfish, because he is saying like, oh yeah, like in a way, like I feel like before he had like some kind of like power where he came from, and then he's coming to this new place and he wants that. He feels like he still deserves that power. So in a way, he's saying like, oh, see, like I am still, because I'm this type of person, because I'm deserving of this power. You can see how my family's continuing this with me, making sure that I still have that position in this society.
Yes. He rose to a position of prominence in this society because he could do things that was valuable. And he is perpetuating this throughout his generations, throughout his kids and their kids and so on. It doesn't say anywhere that they share the same expertise or training. It doesn't say anywhere that, he sent them back to Egypt to go to school to educate them, or that he stayed up late at night with them to make sure that they learned anything. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. We don't know. All we know is the kids become the top of the heap too. That's what we call an aristocracy. And here we have an example of what you would argue is a natural aristocracy. Some people are just better. Some people are meant to be in charge. Some people, it's just their place to be rulers. And this one little line, each man subjugating his tribe, I would suggest is positing exactly that. Now, in what we have seen at the beginning of this story of the centrality of the Pharaoh initially, so much so that when the Pharaoh dies, it's a fear of, world-ending chaos is going to erupt. That kind of tightly organized central government makes people nervous. But there is great confidence built into the idea that when the society is structured in an orderly and organized way around what can only be described as the best people, when that is in place, everything is fine. Sinuhe is very successful in Syria. He is very happy there, and there is every reason to expect that he would want to stay there because he has attained that central position. Not unlike the way the Pharaoh did back in Egypt, just on a smaller tribal scale. It is a natural aristocracy. When Sinuhe dies, there is every implication that his children, presumably his firstborn son, will take over leadership of his tribe, and so on, and so on, and so on. Social stability. From that one line, that is so easy to pass through. In a class like this, I'm asking you to do an awful lot of reading where, you just got, how many pages do I have to go through here? Yeah, okay, I'm going to go here. You're going to start looking for, scanning through. You're going to try and find like active verbs in there that says, and then he did this, and then this happened, and down here, this happened too. But it's all the stuff in between that seeps in these little messages of how we should interpret this work, how it really communicates what's going on, not just what happens in the story, but what it means. These little things in there, tiny little details that slowly accrete over time, shape how you think. Subjugating his tribe is an example of that. It is justifying, it is establishing as a concrete value aristocracy. It is a sign of an ordered world. Part of it, and I want to backtrack just a little bit. My page 59. Because again, aristocracy is great in the abstract, and it does normalize a system of government that people have historically bridled against. Actually, no, just skip over that part. I don't want to go there just yet. On page 61, you get this story of this fight. One of the ways that Sinuhe proves his superiority, his value in this tribal society, is basically this guy shows up and challenges him to a fight. Now, the details are kind of sketchy. We're not given an awful lot, but the symbolism of this is fairly common to see. There is a big bully there, and he's the guy you got to go through if you're going to be top dog. This is schoolyard politics. And you can see the associations and everything from, the story of David and Goliath through Western gunfights. I love Western movies. Through, schoolyard bullies. If you want to be the guy in charge, you pick out the bully and you go up and you knock him down. And you're the big guy then. I felled him with my own axe and gave my war cry on his back. While every Asiatic was bellowing to Mantu, I gave praises while his supporters mourned for him. This ruler, Amunenshi, Amunenshi took me into his arms. Then I carried off his property and plundered his cattle. What he planned to do to me, I did to him. I seized what was in his tent and stripped his camp. With this I became great, grew copious of wealth, and grew plentiful of cattle. Taking stuff is good. You get ahead by robbing some other guy. It's a fixed economy out there. Somebody has money, that's all the money there is. You take it, and you then have that money. What is the lesson to be drawn from that example? Who is this speaking to?
Who's the strongest wins.
Yeah, who is strongest wins. We have very few details about this story. Again, it seems very familiar to us because you can go through all these different iterations of it, but the actual details of this story are very few. So you can, again, leave behind the literal story about what happens and start plowing more into the symbolic thing, the symbolic level. And this is a story about might makes right, in a way. If there is wealth out there, take it. If there is a rival appearing on the horizon, knock him down. Knock him down, take his stuff, then you are richer. You are feared because you are stronger than the challenger, and you are richer because you get to take everything he has. Who benefits from hearing this story?
Kings,
Kings. Why?
because they're the strongest and have everything.
Because they're the strongest and they have everything, or they can get everything.
Also, kings become
In the back?
I feel like kings also, they're kind of like the power can be destructive, so if they do that, people can't say, oh no, you can't do that, because they're with power, and also because they are with power, they have people that can do that for them, and they still benefit in the long run because they're.
Yeah. This is power politics. This has nothing to do with right or wrong. This is just how you get ahead.
I think the royal kids benefit the most because I feel like king, he's the one who goes through this first, so his army was knock somebody down. So he's experienced. He doesn't really know if he gets it, but I feel like his children will get the most benefit out of it.
Yeah.
As they already know they can get it through daddy's army without the one.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I would argue that this story is meant for a number of different audiences, but not necessarily too many on the lower tier of society. And if this were a bedtime story for the crown prince, cute little tyke, his dad is the absolute ruler right now, and in a few years, the little tyke will grow up and become the absolute ruler. And what sort of values do you want to instill in him? Empire.
Also, I wanted to add that usually like power was taken by force, and this text kind of justifies it. Like this is how it is. Like you either like win or you die. So this justifies like the actions of all the kings, like how they like get the power and stuff.
Mm-hmm. There's no morality questioned here. There's no doubt on that. There's just, what can you get out of it?
The way you were saying this story was made for limited kind of audience, I agree, but I also think this story was made to show that the kings are very powerful and they also have big heart, because at the end, after everything that Sinuhe did, the king still accepted him, and the way he betrayed him in a way, like he left the country, and it's kind of a sin, but still he has a big heart and he accepts the
The ending shapes the story in very dramatic ways, and we'll get there in a minute.
Oh no, I was just gonna add something to her, because probably this way the people benefits, like the kings can like train their self, like if they have the lots of work, so if someone comes and fight them, at the same time they can train their self, so they can win.
Mm-hmm. Stories are used to teach. We're sitting here reading this story trying to learn something. Wasn't that different several thousand years ago? You use stories to teach, especially little stories like this, which seem to have a little clean moral at the end. It kind of has that bedtime tale feel to it. And those always come with a very simple moral at the end. So you can draw that out and say, okay, yeah, but what is that moral? Art.
A few words about the target audience. Maybe the target audience is not the king, but their governors who belong to the king. Why? Here in the bottom, he basically shows that if someone betrays you, kill him. But at the end, we know that the king forgives him. It's kind of opposite. So maybe not a story of teaching the king how to rule the country, but teaching the governors how to rule the country and then how to obey the king.
Yeah. I think just as a, again, on a somewhat historical level, at this period, kings and pharaohs and whatever, the big guy, the guy in the corner office, didn't necessarily know how to read and write. Very frequently, this was the case for the next several thousand years. Reading and writing is about essentially bookkeeping at this level. So those are the skills of those mid-level functionaries. Some of the higher management maybe, but a big chunk of middle management. But you need them to all believe the same things. You need them to stay in line. And if you are a king, those are also generally your biggest threat. Because ordinary people can be put down, but people within the government know how power centers tend to work. And so those are the ones you need to keep in line. And they're also going to be your strongest advocates for keeping the power structure as it is. So you want to arm them with arguments for that. A lot of that is edging into speculation that we just don't know that much. But I want you to bear in mind that this is a factor, that the history is bearing down on this, because this story is doing things in very specific ways that we need to be aware of. It's not just the story of a guy who freaks out, runs away, and then gets welcomed home at the end. That's a nice story. It's beautiful. But there's other stuff going on, because I just explained that story in, 3 sentences, and this thing goes on for quite a few pages. What's the stuff in between? How is that affecting you? What's it trying to do? On page 67, I want to take a look at a very short moment. Again, little moments that characterize how you're supposed to perceive reality. Page 67, the second, it's like line 450 and down. On my book, it's the second stanza down. He is, at this point, he has been called back home to Egypt. He has up and left everything in Syria behind. His entire life, his wife and kids, all of his wealth, on the promise that more wealth, both economic and spiritual, await him upon return to Egypt. But, every time I read this, I think, well, I really want to see the scene with him explaining this to his wife. Missed opportunity, but that's me. I'm dwelling in the literal. Obviously, that is not important. We're never given her name, even. Characters who get names in ancient literature are usually more important than those who don't. And when they're not given a name, there's a reason. It's somebody saying, it's the author or editor saying, don't worry about that. Beside the point. What they write, that's what you're supposed to focus on. But he is coming back and he's re-entering the society. And look how he is introduced into this this court, this hall. I touched the ground between the sphinxes as the royal children stood in the portal receiving me, and the friends who ushered to the pillared hall were showing me the way to the audience hall. And you can just imagine the cinematic quality of all of this opulence. He's been living out in he does well, but basically tents in the desert for years and decades at this point. So now he's coming back in this enormous civilization with golden palaces and huge structures and, imposing civilization, the royal grandeur. I found His Majesty on the great throne in the portal of Electrum. Then I was stretched out prostrate, unconscious of myself in front of him, while this God was addressing me amicably, meaning amicant, friendly, talking to me as a friend. This God talking to me as a friend. I was like a man seized in the dusk. My soul had perished. My limbs failed. My heart was not in my body. I did not know life from death. What does this sound like? This sounds familiar within the context of this story. What does it sound like?
Beginning, when he was running away and he saw that person similar.
Yeah. My heart was not in my body. I did not know life from death. That sounds like he's about to die. He is in this transition phase, this liminal space, as you would call it if you were a really annoying English person. This place where you're uncertain of everything. You're between two things, life and death, presumably on the way from one to the other. But just imagine the terror that causes that. The awesome, overwhelming quality of what he is encountering that is almost literally killing him. I did not know life from death. My soul had perished. My limbs failed. My heart was not in my body. My soul had perished. That sounds, dire. That sounds dramatic. But what does it mean?
It's kind of the opposite of that sentence that he said before.
How so? How is it the opposite of the earlier
He
sentence?
said that he's lifted his heart at that time, but here it's like falling down. It's quite
Yeah.
opposite.
There, he's lifting his heart in a sense, gathering up his soul and protecting it and putting it forth. Here, the soul itself seems to be dispersed, gone entirely. His identity, if you can call that his soul, and again, language, his identity is essentially nullified at this point. His individualism is surrendered, which, seems like the opposite move of the earlier thing, when he was kind of, where it can be argued that he was reaching for an extension of his life by clinging to his soul, his individualism. Now he is very literally going back to Egypt. Why? To die. That's the selling point. Yeah, the Pharaoh says, you're going to have, we're going to give you some money, we're going to give you a nice house, everything's going to be great, but what he's really saying to him is, you're going to come back here to die. Don't die out there with those people. Come back home. Die here. We will give you a proper funeral. We will take care of you. Funerals, very big in the ancient world. Don't die in the wilderness. Come home. And everything he's been walking through has been this awesome, the word that's coming to me, quite frankly, and it's speaking on other new levels of meaning, is erection of magnificence, an erection of civilization, tall towers, the pillared hall. And then after that, another hall, the audience hall. And then after that, you get to the throne with the king on it. And this enormous architecture that, is very clearly designed to intimidate people. with the magisterial presence, this God who speaks to them amicably. And he is surrendering his identity right here.
I'm
Questions?
just wondering, what if he never went to Egypt to die there?
If he never went to Egypt to die there? I don't know.
What would the God's response be?
I don't know. The case they make to him is all about the afterlife, about which we have very little information. The case they make to him is essentially a social case, saying, you belong with us. Come rest your bones here among your people. We are civilized. Don't let yourself be, ushered into the afterlife by the barbarians, the foreigners.
Does that mean like king can forgive to keep his pride up in a way, like I'm not gonna let you die somewhere else. You were born here, you meant to be here, you will be here.
Yeah. There is a sense of the Pharaoh is, for no apparent selfish motivation, the Pharaoh is concerned with the soul of this one guy who ran off decades ago and was, like I said, essentially a bureaucrat within the royal court. I assume they found other people to take over his duties, but if you're running a company and one day Ed up and quits, well, you post the job opening for a new Ed, and the new Ed shows up, and decades later you're not thinking about Ed. What's it to him? It is curious, though. Why would the king care? Why would the Pharaoh be so concerned with this one person?
Because there are not many of them.
Because there are not many of them?
Yes.
Many of whom?
Like this society of like aristocrats is very like few of them. It's a little group. That's why they care about every single one.
Maybe. They are aristocrats. They are naturally exclusive and selective. Presumably, a lot of care went into the education of Sinuhe. He, has some expertise. He has some thing. Did I hear somebody out here? Or is that just the door? Okay. Sinuhe has some value in the society. So maybe they want to, keep all that value for themselves. If Sinuhe is out there exercising his skills among the Syrians, that's creating a rival power, perhaps? You can't have those floating around out in the world. See, there is somebody out there.
No, we've got locked, I guess.
Hello. Don't take that personally. We just didn't want you in. Hey, there we go. That should be good for another hour. Think about this in a couple of different ways, however. Think about the emotionalism on both sides. Think about how, maybe this Pharaoh, about whom we have no information, it is the same Pharaoh that became Pharaoh at the beginning of the story. So this is the guy Sinuhe was traveling with, and initially, presumably, was concerned about taking over, but also, maybe they knew one another in some capacity. Who knows? Maybe they were friends, and Sinuhe just figured, well, he's a good guy to hang out with, but is he really right for the top job? He's kind of a doofus. And here we have this guy decades later coming around and saying, Sinuhe, my friend, come home. I'm concerned about you. That's a powerful message. That's inspiring. Who doesn't want to be valued like that? Who doesn't want to be forgiven like that? Remember, Sinuhe is, AWOL. He ran off. I assume that is frowned upon. In a moment of panic, of fear, an irrational action, he ran. He abandoned his position. And he's being forgiven for that by this God-like creature, this individual who represents awesome power in society, and he's forgiven. What?
Like, is it something that he had something about the pharaoh that like he thought they were gonna kill him or something like that, so he ran away, and now they're forgiving him, so he thinks.
We don't know. In fact, we have no idea. Maybe you do. I certainly don't. Why Sinuhe ran away? Why did Sinuhe run away?
How can he even trust them and come back? Like, they might play him. Just saying,
Yeah,
hey, yeah, come back.
come on back. Yeah, we miss you. No ulterior motive here. Come on. Yeah, give up everything back there. Yeah, you just come all alone. Don't come with any friends. Just you. Come on in. Yeah. This way. Great. I think I've seen this play out in a few mob movies before. You go somewhere alone, it's bad. You get capped in the back of the head. Boom! Joe Pesci, Goodfellas, Good movie. Westerns and gangster movies. Great. You don't know.
Could it be because he was like running away from the previous pharaoh, and now it's the new one who forgives him for his previous?
Well, the previous pharaoh, meaning the guy who was on the throne at the beginning of the story.
Yeah, that's why.
And it's his death that seems to precipitate Sinuhe running away. So, again, it's very vague. And in fact, at three different moments, Sinuhe explains why he ran off. I won't go through them individually, but spoiler alert, all three explanations are different. Now, when somebody is explaining something to you with three different excuses, how much can you trust any of them? I ask my kids, why didn't you do your homework? And if they come up with three different excuses, I know they're all bullshit. Maybe one of them is true. Maybe the first one was just, denying the whole thing. Maybe the second one is, well, you're starting to feel a little guilty, so you're going to let a little truth seep in. Maybe the third one is finally just saying, yeah, I got to admit it. But we have no idea. We don't know why Sinuhe runs away. It's a mystery. Now, you can use that in a couple of different directions. You can say, well, okay, maybe that's like the whole identity and reaction of the wife. Maybe that's just not important. Or maybe because it's so conspicuous at the center of this story, maybe it's the most important. Why do people do things at all? This isn't a logical choice. There's no explanation of him making this choice logically. He has reasons, perhaps, but he never really articulates them.
The king told him not to bring his wife and kids, or he's the one deciding not to bring them. So he's the one deciding.
Yeah, Sinuhe. Well, I don't believe, and here I'm not sure, but I don't believe the king's invitation extends to bring the wife and the family. We'd love to catch up. Let's have a barbecue. I don't think it goes into that level of detail. Interestingly, though, it doesn't seem to be a question regardless. Now, significantly, all of those people, the wife and the kids, well, they're Syrians. They're those people. There's a great little moment on page 69 that I just happen to have in front of me, where he's been welcomed back and he is settling back into life in a very ritualistic and symbolic fashion. My page 69, which is roughly line 534, 32, I don't know, numbers. The years were made to pass from my limbs. I became clean shaven and my hair was combed. A load was given back to the foreign country and clothes back to the sandfarers. I was clad in fine linen. I was anointed with fine oil. I slept in a bed. I returned the sand to those who are upon it, and the tree oil to those smeared with it. What is that about? That's more than your average shower. What do we think? He's cleansing himself. Cleansing is a potent word. Cleansing is more than, cleaning up. Yeah, it's a spiritual, ritualistic cleansing. Religions from all over the world have ritualistic cleansings, baptisms of one form or another, where you cannot pollute the house of God. If you're going to interact with any divine capacity, you cannot pollute them with dirt. You need to cleanse yourself physically and thus also spiritually. And here, he's getting very visceral about it. A load, presumably of dirt, was given back to the foreign country and clothes back to the sandfarers. He is washing off, literally, symbolically, all of Syria and his life there, including his family, the wife and kids. They are the dirt he needs to leave behind and send back to the other country, the sandfarers. Again, language is tricky. You can't lean on it too much with any translated work, but sandfarers doesn't sound like a compliment. It kind of stings like an epithet, an insult. I return the sand to those who are upon it, and the tree oil to those smeared with it. That's a little bit of an inside baseball symbolism there. Tree oil would have been what people in Syria use, but he differentiates that from I was anointed with fine oil. Not that stuff you buy from Costco. This is good top shelf oil. He's distinguishing there, and he's leaving behind. He is denying everything that came before because they are not one of the tribe. They are not Egyptian. His wife and his family, or his wife and his kids and their families, and presumably we're talking about a couple generations at this point, they're all foreigners. And here we can start to see, this foreigner thing has been coming up quite a lot. This foreigner thing is repeated. It has some value that maybe I'm passing over. because they are constructing this awesome world around the Pharaoh, around Egypt itself, this great civilization that stands in such stark contrast to the wilderness, the land beyond, the outsiders, the foreigners. They're creating a world where the city, the state, the empire is everything, and it is us and them. And the case that Sinuhe succumbs to is that he needs to go home. He is, no matter what he does, how long he spends away, he is always part of Egypt. He will never be Syrian.
I don't know, like thinking about his individual, this journey, like he went all by himself, he came back all by himself. It reminds me in a way, like as a human being, you came to the world all by yourself and you were having a journey with different people, and then you are going back without taking anyone or without taking anything with you.
Sure.
Is it like representing in a way, like, well, just not only about his life or what he's doing, but also in a way representing everyone's life?
Yeah, on a symbolic level, it is absolutely doing that. On a symbolic level, it is absolutely positing that. Again, the details in the story can be a little sketchy. So they invite you to jump very quickly from the literal to the symbolic and say, well, what is this? We all, in one way or another, are born into this world. We are all subject to moments of panic. We all make decisions that aren't always particularly rational. And even in retrospect, we have hard times explaining what we do. But isn't it nice that at the end of that, we can be forgiven? Isn't it nice that after all, people can say, all that doesn't matter. You went off, you did some stupid stuff, you know? Come home. You belong with us. Your family can forgive you. Yes, you spend a couple of years doing stupid stuff in your 20s. Everybody does something that, let's face it, your parents aren't thrilled with. And there will be some friction for a while. There are going to be some hard feelings. There's going to be some estrangement there. But when it's done, you can come home. They will welcome you. You can re-enter that society because your identity is still with them. That's powerful, that's emotional, that is, yes, beautiful. It pulls at you emotionally on that level, and thus we can respond to it with our hearts. But it also has a significant level that we need to understand it's working on with our heads. It is saying that no matter what, those people out there are less important. Your identity is constructed socially with us. You can go out and build an entire other life in another part of the world with another people. A totally different civilization, but no matter what, your identity, who you are, belongs here. The king, the pharaoh, lives in this palace that is constructed, built obviously to intimidate, to impress upon people the awesome power of his role. The different halls laid out with great majesty, presumably great opulence and wealth displayed, trying to intimidate you as you walk in. And you can see that terror in Sinuhe's heart as he's going through this. Sinuhe has presumably been in this hall many times, but now he's coming in with a sense of sin, of having transgressed, and he feels unworthy, perhaps, and he's being welcomed in, but still, it's being welcomed into something that is very, very overwhelming. It is the empire keeping him in line, bringing him back into the fold, saying, don't go out there, come home, you're one of us. We own you. And that's powerful. When I say at the end he has to surrender his individuality as he walks in that moment of terror, that's what he's doing. Because he's no longer an individual at that point. He's just one of them. And if you are one of them, and by here I mean not just the king, but yes, the entire aristocracy, the power structure in this country, you want to keep everybody in line. You want to impress on them that you may make a mistake from time to time. You may wander off, but we'll get you back. And what's more, you'll want to come back because there's nothing out there for you. No matter what you do, you're always going to belong here with us. No matter what you do, how much you build out there, it's all nothing. And it will wash away like dirt when you come back because you have to come back. So why wander off? Why go anywhere? Why give in to those moments of panic? In those moments of panic, when you suddenly feel an urge to, no matter what, bolt, remind yourself of this simple little story. Remind yourself that, well, yeah, I could run off into the wilderness, a symbolic wilderness of some sort or another, perhaps. I could do all of that and spend decades out wandering around, building something nice maybe, but never as nice. But what's the point? We're all going to come back because we have to. We're all going to get drawn back into this world, the only world that matters, because that's who we are. It's comforting in a way. It's threatening in a way. It reduces the capacity of free will, the ability to make your own choices. You might like that, you might hate that, but this story is suggesting that it doesn't matter. Your ability to like or dislike it is irrelevant. This is the existing world order. Your only job is to give into it.